The first time that my husband David and I went deep sea fishing on a charter boat was off the coast of Isla Morada in the Florida Keys 30 years ago. We arrived before sunrise, not quite sure what to expect from the day. We were little teeny babies back then, and this was our first time. But we were hopeful that at least we would catch enough fish for dinner that night. We got on our boat, we found it, and got on the boat, and then the captain and the first mate introduced themselves to us, showed us around, and we settled in on the stern for the ride out of the harbor. And about 5 minutes in, the boat slowed to an idle, and then we kind of just held still while our first mate picked up the casting net that was neatly and artfully arranged, if you know what I'm talking about, all pretty on the deck. I almost said floor. Like, clearly I'm not a boat person. He threw the net over his shoulder, then he elaborately gathered the net, put some in his mouth and held it out with his hands, and then he cast it out into the water for our bait fish. We had too many fish to count. They were caught, brought into the boat, dropped into the live well, and we headed out. He then spent the rest of our day-long charter casting out the lines, repairing them, rebaiting them, helping us get the fish off, and coaching us through what is to date still our most successful fishing trip we have ever had. He was so good at his job that it didn't really look like a job. He was casting and mending and tending to us. He was the best mate we've ever had on a boat by a long shot. Because we have spent countless hours deep sea fishing since then, we caught the bug. We have gotten to know a lot of captains and first mates over the years. Two people who spend at least 12 hours a day together, and over 300 days a year, as long as the weather's good, working in a necessarily symbiotic relationship. So fish are caught. That's it. It's a simple goal. People want to catch fish, and it's their job to make it happen. Fish, however, do not care to be caught, turns out. Weather conditions also differ from one day to the next, sometimes even 1 hour to the next. And what worked as bait yesterday gets you nothing. Your little hole, your little secret, no fish there today. Plus those guests. You know, some of them know how to fish and some of them don't. And so you have to get to know people, their personalities. You have to teach and respond to such a wide variety of people. So every day, while they have one goal, and everything they do, they have to achieve that goal, the job kind of changes all the time. So I am always happy to talk about deep sea fishing, and if you find David Hanks, he likes to talk about it even more than me. That's not what this sermon's about, though. I want to tee up a question for you. Why did Jesus first approach people who fished? I don't know, were they the closest ones? I don't think so. Why not carpenters? Carpenters build important things in the community. Why not blacksmiths? Blacksmiths create strong things that last potentially forever. He didn't approach masons who crafted blocks out of the earth to build things that we take pilgrimages to go visit today. He didn't seek out rabbis or soldiers. So why did he choose this group of people who got up before dawn and set out to fish, casting and mending their days away? I've given quite a bit of thought to what it means to be called to follow Jesus, both as a person who felt called as a member of the laity for most of my adult life, and specifically then called to ordained ministry. Some feel called even, quite specifically, to live monastically, even Episcopalians. Did you know? And for them we give thanks, especially today on Religious Life Sunday in the life of the Episcopal Church. Because being called to spend your life in a monastic community, or as a volunteer at Good Shepherd Camp, or as an office volunteer, or as someone who feeds our neighbors through Trinity Streets Ministry, or as a lay reader, choir member, or an acolyte, no matter the call, each of us are indeed called by God. to respond to that abundant outpouring of love that is given to us through our creation and inclusion in the body of Christ. We are made uniquely. We have individual gifts and talents. We're in different contexts, and we are each called to take our place. You are indeed called. Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John said yes to Jesus in a much more sacrificial way than most of us ever will have to do. I want to dig into that part of the story just a little bit deeper. In today's text from the gospel, Jesus first approaches Simon Peter and Andrew. And if you'll note in the text what they're doing when he comes up to them, they're casting their nets. Once they agreed and drop everything and go, James and John are the next ones that he approaches. They are mending their nets with their father when Jesus calls them to join this growing group. Both casters and menders are called, the first to be invited and to respond with a yes. I think these two jobs can be a real metaphor for what the world needs from us who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ. First, there are the casters. They're the ones who find themselves in the midst of opportunities. They might also be people who look around, assess situations, notice where the needs are, where gifts and needs can be matched. There's an art to being someone who casts about. You're probably curious and committed, maybe even a risk taker. There's a new group forming at the church. Well, of course you're going to consider signing up. A new formation opportunity is added to the calendar. Well, you check yours to see if you can make it work. A call goes out for volunteers. You always say yes. Whether you march in a parade or a protest, oh, you'll be happy to do that if the need is what you think God is calling you to. Casters see problems and seek to find solutions. And like the first mate and the captain, they see the goal for God's kingdom and faithfully take their place. But if there were only casters, who would be there to meet the brokenness head on? The menders complete the symbiotic nature of the body of Christ. Menders make sure the mailing goes out and the phones get answered so that the church can be what it needs to be for the people. Menders bring communion to homebound people in our church family and pray with deep intention for those in need. They wash the linen for the altar and they set out the coffee for funeral receptions. They visit and check in with their sick friends. They make casseroles to feed hungry people who are in need of the balm of a good meal. They take care to plan their final affairs for their family. They give generously to the church and others, and they're sure to catch the service online when they can't be there in person. Menders are the people who step into the gap. The church and the world cannot function without them. Which are you? A little of both, maybe? Lean heavily towards a mender, lean heavily towards being a caster. Good news, Jesus needs us all, casters and menders, to become disciples. The world and the church needs casters and menders today, and we are invited to consider how God is calling each of us into ministry. Because it's just what we do when we are loved so deeply and so generously, and are given the gifts we don't deserve of grace and mercy. We likely don't have to leave behind our family or our vocations like Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John. But we are indeed called to ministry. We are called to act on our faith, to take leaps of faith even, and to find our ways to both worship God and join God in ministry. That's when we find our own symbiotic response to being followers of Christ. Dietrich Bonhoeffer put into words a way of understanding that need to be present in the world beyond ourselves when he said, "Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." We can respond to God's call with apathy, hesitation, and avoidance, or we can respond with faithful determination and just take the first step. But how in the world do we know what to do? Well, there's no easy answer here. I'm a great example of that, old lady preach. And each member dedicates themselves to prayer, service, and evangelism. Perhaps using this motto as a prayer will give you the strength you need to take that next step in finding your place. For his sake, I am but one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. What I can do, I ought to do. What I ought to do, by the grace of God, I will do. Lord, what will you have me do?